My topic today is harmony without uniformity, representation of Chinese identity through Olympics. In about 15 minutes, I try to cover a few major points. The first one is the confluence of Olympic idealism and Chinese Renaissance. And then I will focus my discussion on the perceptual gaps between Chinese and outside world. Finally, I will particularly look at the role of global civil society in the case of torch relay to illuminate the kind of discrepancies between the Chinese domestic society here, mainly the public, now the state, now the government on the one side, and the outside world, or generally the global civil society. Based on this few points, I may share with you some of my reflections on Beijing Olympics with a focus on the so-called international goals of the Beijing Olympic Games. Perhaps He Zhenliang's remarks, as quoted here, is not unfamiliar to many of you. From this, you can see the Chinese have very strong sense of history making by hosting the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. The undertone of this history making sense or consciousness, of course, is to pursue kind of vision of new world order or the vision of harmonious world. So that is very much the general international goals which serve as organizing principle for the host city or host country or the Beijing Olympic organizers. Well, sorry, those unreadable things are Chinese characters I already put there, but it doesn't, sorry that if that bother you, but the meaning are the same as the English words there. So let me first then put the Beijing Olympics in the historical perspectives. The Chinese sense of history can be described as history complex. So there are three basic components of this in a very general way, you can say, of the Chinese understanding of the history. First is the long-standing Chinese civilization. So every Chinese kid is educated in such a way. China has 5,000 years of history. China was very great nation. Then the second part is the recent modern history. I mean, the so-called century of humiliation. So only in modern times, China suffered the Western colonialism, imperialism, and the Chinese nation were humiliated. And the most recent part then, particularly with the recent 30 years of reform opening up, this so-called rise of China or Chinese Renaissance, both in terms of the culture revelry and also the rise of political and military power. So these three components then inform the Chinese understanding of their relations, the China's relations with the outside world in a very significant way. When it comes to the Olympics, so-called the central long Chinese Olympic dream is embedded in this, modern part of Chinese history. I think briefly, there's two major specific goals by pursuing this Olympic dream. One is, of course, building strong nation. So the Chinese Olympic dream is very much associated with the Chinese long march of the nation building, the modern nation building. So to be strong in the family of the nations. Of course, as part of this, join the world, join the modern world, and to be respected, to restore the status of the great power in the world. And then Olympics serve as kind of platform through which then China, or at least Chinese elites think that way, can represent this Chinese national identity through the hosting this great or this mega events. Well, now let me turn to the international goals again. In 2000, then Chinese President Jiang Zemin, in his letter to the IOC, in support for Beijing's bid for 2008 game, he particularly emphasized the significance of the Olympic Games to be held in China in the sense of promoting the cultural exchange and the convergence between the East and the West. And here, the second part of his this quote, I think, touch upon some key characteristic of Chinese identity. So even it's rather straightforward. So China is a rapidly developing country, long-standing civilization, and 22% of world population. So in a way, when we later look at how the Bocock and then people like Zhang Yimou designed the Olympics opening ceremony, for example, you can somehow find the manifestation of those characteristics as part of the representation of Chinese identity. The core of the message in terms of the international objectives China attempt to pursue can be summarized as the harmonization of civilizations and mutual understanding between East and West. And in particular, there's a notion, I think that's a Confucius notion, so-called 和而不同, harmony without uniformity. The harmony without uniformity was put forward by Wen Jiabao in his speech at Harvard University in 2003. So that was, as you know, the background of that is also the China's preparation for the Olympic Games. But more fundamentally, there were emerging intellectual discourse about the harmony. So the harmony became the central organizing concept which, through which and the Chinese elites, both in political and intellectual elites, try to present their vision of the world or the world order. And Confucius' notion is, as I guess, as many of you know, right? So this is so-called harmony without uniformity. Well, that is the grand kind of vision. But what about how Chinese people perceive of this, the public, the general, the masses, and also how outside the world perceive of this? That is the next issue I would like to discuss here. The Chinese public seem to be very upbeat about the Beijing Olympics in the run-up to the Games. So not only about the game itself, but more importantly, about the general direction of the country, about the economy of the country. So this survey was done by Pure Global Research last year in March and April. That's after, I think that's in the mid of the Tibet riot, but also after the torch relay already started. But you can see, particularly the right-hand side of the result of the survey. Even though people may not fully satisfied with their personal life, their country's general economy, but they are very supportive of Beijing Olympics. Here, the 2002 figures show the people's satisfaction was rather low, right, about 50%. And then in 2008, it's really, you see the great change there. And then on the left-hand side, the last column there, about 80% of Chinese feel Olympics is important to them personally, not only to the nation, but to themselves. So the point here is the Chinese, in general, feel very enthusiastic about the Beijing Olympics. They feel this is part of their personal life, not only part of the national life. What about the international, the perception by the people outside of China? Again, the survey done by Pure Project show quite wide range of the attitudes toward the Beijing Olympics. But what I would like to point out is, at the bottom, 3 countries worth particular attention: France, US, Japan. In those three countries, people who thought Beijing Olympics was, for IOC to grant the host right to Beijing to host the 2008 game was bad decision, were more than those who thought that was good decision, right? And particularly France and Japan, about 55% of people thought that was bad decision. In the United States, about 43 of the public who thought that was bad decision, but those who thought it was good decision was 41%. So slightly more people thought that was bad decision. That was the survey done in March, April of last year. So there's the point here is there's such perceptual gap or discrepancies between the people within China and the people outside China. Let me just quickly look at the torch relay as kind of an example to illustrate of this point, the discrepancies between China and the outside world. The torch relay was really highlight of the Beijing Olympic planning. Even before Beijing got the right to host the game, on the eve of the vote, the Chinese cultural ambassador Yang Lan made such remarks to appeal to the IOC members. And her major point is, the Beijing Olympic torch relay will break new ground and will also reach new heights, right? Break new ground means traveling from across all the major civilization zones. And by reaching new heights, as you know, is cross the Himalaya, or that is the highest, the world summit, the Mount Chumulangma. So that is a really very big part of the Beijing game planning. So I'm not here to give you the whole story of the torch relay, but I just want to focus on one particular point. The media coverage of the torch relay in China and outside China. So from the Chinese, particularly the official media, the Xinhua, other official media outlets, you see bright picture of the torch relay. So those are the slogan of the torch relay is light the passion, share the dream. So you see people in the outside world in those all those legs of the torch relay route seem to embrace the torch relay very enthusiastically, right? But those the picture mostly showed by the official media in China. And this is the crossing the Chumulangma. Well, in the West, you see very different pictures in the media about the torch relay. So that is the protest against the Beijing Olympics, against the Chinese government, against the Chinese human rights record, and so on and so forth. Interestingly, most of those disturbing pictures didn't show in the Chinese official media, at least were not widely covered by the official media. But the Chinese netizens, both those who were in China and outside China, seem to capture this part of the story. And then they make it big deal. And then they immediately, this kind of, the protest against torch relay triggered very emotional reactions among the Chinese students and overseas students in particular, but also students and young people within the country. And the image of Jinjing, as I guess many of you know, really play a very important role in the discourse here, the nationalist kind of discourse against particularly the Western media. And the young people seem to be genuinely felt very frustrated and very disillusioned about the Western media, in particular about the Western political system in general. So that kind of wounded national pride were very much the torch relay part of the Beijing Olympics. And both within the country and outside the country, and young people began to mobilize themselves. For example, the picture on the left hand shows a girl who actually, after she learned about Jinjing's story, she went to the Carrefour in Beijing, one of the Carrefour chain store in Beijing, and posted those pictures she got from the internet, and then began to try to mobilize other people to take action against French government or French store here. But when I read that story, actually not many people show interest, and some people even wonder why you did this. So, but anyway, eventually, that kind of nationalist backlash gained momentum. So I call this a kind of anti-Western media guerrilla warfare, because that was not, at least initially, manipulated by the state or by the government. Rather, state tried to downplay this part of the story. So that perhaps in the discussion Q&A session we can discuss further. Okay, let me try to be quick to run up my presentation here. I think what more significant is not simply just a nationalist backlash. I think more significant is some reflections, some serious and sophisticated reflections about China's relations with the outside world, And this people talk, what people talk about the power of discourse. So they think basically in this world, even we have I'm talking about those young people who are involved in this kind of discourse. They think even we are so sincere about promoting so-called harmonious world vision, this world is not as ideal as the Olympic idealism described to us. So it's a real world is still dominated by the Western power and technology. And here, not only the political and the ideological power, but particularly the media. Okay, let me just, okay, just I go to the last slide here. Sorry to take more time. Well, one particular observer of this confrontation between the Chinese public and the outside world, or the media in particular, was provided by Fu Ying, who's Chinese ambassador to Britain. And she's a little bit worried about this kind of nationalist trend in China. And I just quickly read her point here. The wall that stands in China's way to the world is thick. Simply a sincere heart was not enough to ensure China's smooth integration with the world. The younger generation of Chinese began collective rethinking about the West. But she, worried about this kind of nationalist tendency, and then she said, I do pray from the bottom of my heart that the younger generation of Chinese will not be totally disillusioned about the West, which remains the key partner for our modernization. Thank you very much.